Today we're going to be building a login form for a website or any project that you're working on. And let's go ahead and jump right in. So I've created this folder with a basic index.html file, styles.css file as well, which we're going to be later styling the form. But without further ado, we can go ahead and style or create the form to begin with. And we'll add a header. We're also going to want to make the form. So for any form that you're building, it's going to have a form container element, and then it's going to have form fields within it. So we can add the form container first, and then we can add the attributes. So we can say the action, where's it going to go? It's going to go to our server endpoint that we've got set up. And then we've got, what type of method are we going to be using? We're going to use post. So there's two types of methods. There's post and there's get. Get is more, if you're, let's say, like a Google search, you're performing a search type of form on your website or a project, you can go ahead and use get to get back some information. But in this case, the more common method is going to be that post, where you're sending and updating data from a database. So we're going to go ahead and use post. We're going to go ahead and now start adding the fields. So within this container, we're going to add the inputs. And for every field, there are two parts to it. There is the input box, and then there's the label. So input and box for every field. But we can start with just the input, as it's generally the most important in terms of functionality. So we're going to want to add the ID. First, we'll add the type. We'll say type is text. ID is username. We'll say name is username as well. And we'll say that this is required. Then we'll also say input. So we want the username. We're making a login form. So username, we want the password. We can give it a password. ID, we can say password. And name, we can say password. And then we can also make this required. And then as a final step, we're going to add the input type of submit. We need a submit button. And then we need a value of login. There we go. Okay. So if we go ahead and take a look, there we go. We got login. We've got the username. We've got the password. You'll notice that the password type is special because it doesn't show the characters that you're putting in, so that's useful. And then if we, let's say, go back to Visual Studio Code. Okay. Let's go ahead and space this out a bit more. You can add some break tags, like so. How's that looking? Go ahead and do this. Okay. Perfect. Now, we've created the form. Again, to note, you have the form container, you've got the form fields, and then you've got the submit button. You've got the type attribute that specifies, it specifies the type of field that you want to be using. And there are, the more common ones like type text, type email, type tel for phone, and then there's other more specific ones like type password, type submit. These ones have a bit more extra, you could say, like special abilities. And then you have the ID, you've got the name. The ID is going to be associated to more so the client side aspect of the form, and the name is going to be more associated to the server side aspect of the form. So the name is that key to whatever value that someone enters in the field, and then the ID is to identify this specific field if you want to select it with JavaScript, select it with CSS, etc. So we've got this form created. The next step is we're going to add the CSS, and I've already done this to save some time, and we're just using a link element to link our styles. And if we come back to the browser here, you'll see that our form has been added. Perfect. So we've got the form added. Looks like we can add some more details here, such as the labels. So we've got the inputs, but let's also add the labels. And we can do label for So every label essentially has one attribute that you want to associate with the field that you've created, or the input element. And to associate that, it's with the ID. So we can say for the username, and we can say username between the tags, and then we can do that again, label for password, and then we can say password. Okay, so now if we go back, you're going to see, okay, it's a bit more styled. Got more clarity on what we're actually doing. So let's hop back into Visual Studio Code. Now I added these styles. I'm using an external style sheet, using the link element to link to it, where href is, give me the page that we've created, and then what its reference is to the index.html file. Well, it's a style sheet. And so if we go back to styles.css, I wanted to touch on a couple things. It's got a lot of basic styles, colors, background colors, etc., the width, the padding. But the more interesting parts of this I wanted to touch on are, for one, margin auto. So we've got the form with margin auto to center it on the page. So you'll see that it's centered, so that's one key thing. By default, so usually you would use a reset.css file, I would recommend, but by default the browser is the full space of the page. So it takes up the entire viewport width and height. And so, with our CSS here, we, don't have to really specify any width or height because it's already set up as the full width and height. So by margin auto, what that means is that it's taking up that space from the left and the right side to put the form right in the middle, smack dab in the middle there. So essentially equally distributed. And then normally if you're using a reset.css file to get rid of the styles, the default styles from the browser, for the container that contains the form, just be sure to make sure it has enough width and height before you use margin auto, so that is gonna work correctly. So that's the one thing I want to touch on, margin auto. And then the next aspect I wanted to touch on was the difference between an element selector and an attribute selector. So in past videos, we've just dealt with the element selector. The element selector is strictly as implied. You're just giving the name of the tag or the element and then adding the rule set afterwards in curly braces. For a attribute selector, you're still doing the element first. You're putting the name of the element, but then afterwards in brackets here, you're putting the attribute. And in this case, we're selecting the type attribute from the form fields. So, input type text, input type submit, input type password. And from there, we can then add rule sets to adjust how we want this form to look. And that's how we see it here in the browser. So just a little project today. On the client side of building a form, you would still need to set up the server side and make all that logic work, authentication and everything. But just wanted to show you how to style another type of way to style a form. That's it for today. Thanks so much for watching.